Well, hello everybody. It's been over a week since I've made a video. Gee, you've been hearing that a lot since the start of the last election, since the start of the election. Um, One of the reasons it's very hard to make videos at the moment is this is one of the worst elections I've seen in my life. And the first election I ever took real notice of was when I was 16, living in Brisbane. And Joe Peterson won a state election, and I was alone in the house on a Saturday night, and I watched the count on the television, and I saw clearly by the count that Joe Peterson hadn't won the election, but by the end of the night he'd won the election, and I couldn't work out why, and that triggered my interest in elections for the rest of my life. My table's shaking. I'm going to have to do some repairs and deal with that. Also, my computer's making a lot of noise today. I can't do anything about that apart from buying longer cables and moving my computer further away from where I record. As I was saying, this election's one of the most sad elections I've ever seen. There is no vision from anybody. There's a little bit of vision from the Greens. It's quite clear that the people in Parliament have become so far removed from the common people of Australia, they have no idea the issues the common people of Australia have. Last night I watched QandA, and my poor dog had to put up with me shouting and yelling at the TV because all it did was make me angry. Last night on Q&A they had the Shadow Minister for Housing and Homelessness. We have a Minister for Homelessness and a Shadow Minister. They also had the Minister for Homelessness and Housing. And they were talking about the government's housing policies and everything. Here's one thing I want to point out about the Australian housing crisis. We have two crises in this country. We have people who are too poor who can't afford housing who are homeless. Last night there was 100,000 of them. 100,000 people in this country without a roof over their heads. Out of that 100,000, I've forgotten the number. I think it's 14,000 children last night under the age of 16 didn't have a roof over their head. That's our housing crisis. That's our real housing crisis. I'm a hermit. I don't know anybody. I have a couple of friends and a few acquaintances. Most of my acquaintances are homeless. And they're not homeless because they're on drugs. They're not homeless because they're dysfunctional and can't get their shit together. They're homeless because Social Security is set at a certain level and it costs another level to live, and the two don't meet up, meaning that we have anybody on any Social Security payment isn't getting enough money on Social Security to actually pay all their bills and live a life. Last night's Q&A was about housing, and I can't even be bothered going through it because the other housing crisis we have in this country is that we don't have enough houses for the people who want to buy homes to buy houses. But we also have 1 million houses every night in this country that are empty. And there's not much stats on those 1 million houses that are empty. There's only concepts of why they're empty, but they estimate between 2 and 5% of those houses are either between tenants or looking for tenants to rent. The rest of those houses are either short-term rentals, so Airbnb, and that's not a large percentage, at most 10%. So we're getting up to 90% of the million houses that are empty. There's another 30% of those houses that are holiday houses. We think none of these stats are in concrete. The only stat that is in concrete is that we have 1 million empty housing dwellings in this country every single night of the week, and that's from the census. So on census night, there was 1 million empty houses in Australia. The rest of those houses seem to be investment houses where they're choosing not to have tenants, because one of the biggest outlays when you have an investment property is maintenance of that property, and one of the best ways to keep that price down is not put tenants in your house. So a lot of people who buy new houses as investment houses don't put tenants in them at all. They keep them for 5 to 10 years and then sell them because the value of the property's gone up. If they put tenants in the house, they get less resale value for the house in 10 years' time when they resell it. This is what happens when you turn family dwellings into investments. When you build suburbs full of investments rather than building communities for people, which is one of the reasons why societies become so dysfunctional, and I'll get to that soon. Like I said, I can't be bothered going through all of the Q&A garbage from last night, because basically it just seems to me to be privileged people complaining that they don't have enough of the pie. One of the things I'd really like to point out about this election is the media has failed the people of Australia. They have the homeless minister and the shadow homeless minister on Q&A and don't ask one question in the space of an hour about homelessness. So all I can take from that, considering homelessness should be the biggest issue of this election, you can't go into a park in any capital city in this country and not find a tent city. You can't go onto a road laid by in this country and not find somebody living in a caravan on that road laid by. We are seeing scenes in this country as bad as the Great Depression. You can go to soup kitchens at 5 o'clock on a weeknight and see lines down the street of people waiting to go and get a cup of soup. And I've been homeless off and on for 50% of my life. I'm 55, and the reason for that is mental illness. A lot of times I've been homeless is because of my personal dysfunction. I've seen times of really bad poverty in this country. I've also seen times, and I can remember times when I could tell a boss to go and F himself, walk out of that factory, walk next door to the next factory, walk in and ask for a job. I was 16 back then. But so I've seen good times and bad times, and I've never seen times as bad as this. I've read about times as bad as this. I've read about times as bad as this in books about the Great Depression, or when I read poetry and short stories from people like Banjo Patterson and who's the other dude? I forget all these people's names. I'm not really good with names. So you had Banjo Patterson. Henry Lawson was another dude. But basically they were going through a depression in the late late 1900s, so 1880s or whatever it was. That's when you get poems like, I think it was Henry Lawson who spoke about the dirty, gutted children and their horrible language in the street. Clancy of the Overflow, which has great verses in it about poverty. Another, Waltzing Matilda is another great piece of Australian literature about poverty, and he explains that's how bad it is now. We're in Waltzing Matilda times. I was complaining to a friend the other day that half the places I go to take my dog for a walk, I can no longer take my dog for a walk because as I get into the national forest, I come across homeless people living there, and I feel like I'm walking in their personal space because they've gone, I'm a hermit and I don't get along with people and stuff, so I go for walks in the forest with my dog on my own where nobody else goes. But now all those places are filling up with homeless people who need to hide in the forest because the councils are making it impossible. QandA last night had an hour thing on the Australian housing crisis and didn't mention the word homelessness once. The Liberal Party member did. He talked about people with jobs who sleep in cars. Never mentioned the 65-year-old pensioner who's also sleeping in a car because she can no longer afford to pay rent. There's one clip I will show you from QandA because it relates to pensions. And how much, and the answers is a great example of how politicians are just so out of touch.
Next question, which comes from Marge Richmond. Hi, Marge.
Hi, everybody. As a retiree of 10 years, after 50 years in the workforce, my question is this. How can the government expect us to believe that they know everyone is doing it tough when the latest pension increase for a couple equates to 25 cents a day each? Every bill we pay has risen significantly. I find such remarks insulting, to say the very least. Actions definitely speak louder than words in this situation.
Marge, I know that you are really, really fired up about this. Just tell me about that sense of despair you feel. Do you feel like you've been ignored by Canberra?
Yes.
Why?
Well, after 50 years in the workforce and paying tax and bringing my children up and all the costs associated with that, and now as a pensioner expecting to not have an easy life but have a comfortable life, and now we're having to watch the money that's coming in and the huge amounts that are going out.
And how much are you watching it? Just give me a sense of what that is like.
Well, just constantly watching and worrying, particularly in winter when the gas bills are coming in, like you've got to turn, we better not turn it on until 5 or 6 o'clock and we better turn it off at 9 o'clock. You know, it's ridiculous.
Richard.
Well, let's square the circle here. We've just heard Steve worry that we're spending like crazy. We've just heard Marge say we're not spending enough. Now, that's okay. We're one of the richest countries in the world. What we need to do is figure out what our priorities are. Now, the unspeakable truth in Australian politics is that Australia is a low-tax country. According to the pinko lefties at the OECD, Australia would have to collect an extra $100 billion a year, an extra $100 billion per year to become average.
Well, some parts of the community feel high tax.
Absolutely, they do. And this is the beautiful thing about democracy. The gas industry isn't paying any tax. Marge isn't getting enough money. Steve's worried about the deficit. The only way to square this circle is to bring the conversation up a couple of levels.
Well, we've been doing that, I think, here.
Well, but we still need to admit something really simple. Matthias Cormann's the head of the OECD. Remember him, the Liberal Party finance minister?
Yeah.
The OECD says we're one of the lowest tax countries in the developed world. That's why you're worried that we're spending too much, because we're not collecting nearly enough tax. Last year, the big banks made $18 billion in profit on your mortgage. The average mortgage pays $200,000 in profit over its life to the banks. The supermarkets made an extra $1 billion last year because their profit margins went up. The health insurance companies made record profits last year, but they want to put the premiums up. Now, we live in a rich country. We feel poor. We can either collect more tax from the big businesses that can afford to pay it, or we can say, sorry, Marge, you've had it too good for too long. But we can't pretend to have both.
Okay, well... on another
Notice
issue,
how they
which I think
jump
in some ways is adjacent to the issue Marge raised, Labor has also delivered increases to the job seeker allowance, but not nearly enough, according to some. Independent economist Nikki Hutley argues there's economic upside in much bigger jobs.
This is something I was screaming at the TV about. What, they couldn't find someone on New Start to talk about what their poverty's like? No, we have to get a rich, privileged person to talk about it. Alright, because QandA has had several instances. One of them was me, by the way, during the Malcolm Turnbull election, where they put a poor person on TV, they asked the question, and just by asking that question, by the country seeing their poverty, real poverty, it changed the conversation of the election and almost changed who came into power. That's happened several times with QandA. So over the years, they, number one, got rid of Barry Jones. Barry Jones wouldn't have had the Minister for Homelessness on QandA for over an hour and not asked a single question about homelessness. So you have to ask, how incompetent are the ABC? How useless is this lady here? I've forgotten her name at the moment. This makes me so angry that they could have the Minister on for homelessness. You can't go to a single park in the city and they don't ask a question about homelessness. Who the hell is the ABC these days? They're meant to be the Australian broadcaster who informs the Australian people about what the hell Australia is happening in this country, and they seem to be sitting down with both the Liberal and the Labor Party and making sure that poverty isn't a major issue in this election. Isn't it great when all the privileged people don't understand what it's like for the rest of the people in this country, but they want their daughter to get a cheaper home and they don't want to be the bank of mum and dad? Is that their issue? Is that why we have homeless people living underneath a bridge? So that people like this lady's children don't have to put their money in her bank account so that they can get a house? Is that really the biggest issue in this country? Middle class children can't buy a house? What a fucking first world problem. We got real problems in this country, not just homelessness and stuff like that. Our country doesn't raise enough tax. We give so much social welfare to the rich in this country that we don't have any social welfare left for the poor. That's not how a society works. You can't have a functional society when all the welfare goes to the top 10% in this country and the bottom 10% get nothing. That's how you have a youth crime crisis. But then youth crime crises are also helpful because you need to build new prisons. And what does a new prison look like on an economist's spreadsheet? A new prison looks like growth. I'm going to finish this video now. No, I'm not, because I wanted to show you how to fix housing. Okay, for a year I haven't been able to find this online. Obviously, the Victorian government have catalogued everything, and I thought they were hiding it, and I was completely wrong. What this page here is from the Victorian Government Library Services. And it's the annual report for the Housing Commission of Victoria, together with appendices from 1938 to 1952-53. Annual report of the Housing Commission for the period, together with appendages 53 and 54. Now, these annual reports stopped in 1980. During that QandA thing, you had this that silly Labor lady saying how Labor's investing more than any other government since World War II. And what these reports show you is a lie, because we used to have a time in this country when government departments had to issue a report to Parliament every year and say what the hell they were doing. I will go back and read 1972, 73 report. 1972 is when we moved into our Housing Commission house in Newcombe in Victoria, and I'm very interested in that report. But in the old days, the only report I could find was the 1975 one, which is here. If we want to fix housing for the middle class kids that can't get housing, there's only one solution that works. And that solution is Housing Commission. This is a report from 1975. It's the 37th annual report, 1974-75, from the Victoria. And it gets right into the building program and what they're doing. Williamstown, Elderly Persons Union, building construction. The 1974-1975 financial year saw a much greater interest by builders in Housing Commission construction contract. This was partly due to the downturn in activity in the private sector of the building industry, but was largely attributed to the efforts of Commission staff who conducted meetings in many areas with all those associated with the building industry. During the year, 150 separate contracts for the construction of a total of 2,622 villas and flats were entered into. So that, no, 2,622. Villa estate site planning. A total of 3,552 villas were planned on 92 estates throughout Victoria. One of the prototype granny flats installed on a metropolitan site. This is how you fix a housing problem. Like, we've done all this. So let's look at flat construction from 1974-1975 in the state of Victoria. Flat construction. Flats completed during the year included a 12-storey block containing 180 bed sitting rooms in Princes Street, Prahran, 6 2- and 4-storey blocks, 22 varied units in Raglan Street, South Melbourne. These are quite famous Housing Commission spots nowadays. 1 4-storey block, 24 3-bedroom masonettes in Napier Street, Fitzroy. 6 2-storey blocks in Wickham Parade, Brunswick, 4 5-storey blocks, which is 83 bedroom and 41 bedroom in Bendigo, Bank Street, Prahran. 3 2-storey blocks, 4 2-storey blocks. This is just for inner city construction. 73 elderly persons unit. Sounds like the engineering. All right, now this is very important. This whole section in this report talks about designing communities, metropolitan flats and special program, the landscape and planting and site works of the available area surrounding the final high-rise blocks of flats in Langdon Park, Hyatt Street, Richmond was completed to coincide with occupation. Oh, so this is just when the high-rises in Melbourne and Hoddle Street, and they talk about, like everyone should go and look at this. The reason I'm showing you this is because we don't need to think of new ideas to fix housing. The ideas are here. Now let's talk about some figures about Housing Commission in Victoria in 1975. And the reason I picked this is the end of the biggest housing boom in this country's history, and I want to show how we actually fixed the housing crisis in Australia in the past. During the year ending the 30th of June 1977, Tennessee branch received 11,000 669 applications, of which 6,278 were for metropolitan estates and 4,791 for country areas. The numbers of tenancies granted in the course of the year are shown hereunder with comparable figures for the previous year. So metropolitan, they housed 3,133 people. Yeah. Now, you got to think they're doing these figures every single year, year on year. In the country, they put another 2,395 for 74 and 1,780. That totals 5,000 people for the 74, 75, and these are tenancies, by the way. They're not people, right? And the year before that, 4,700. Following are details of applications for tenancy purchase. So these are for people. For lone person, 2,700. Lone rental, 852. Childless couples, 588. Families, 11,412. And the year before that, 15,000. For purchases, families, the numbers are amazing. Units sold, 36,373. Sales during 74 and 75, 2,060. Total units sold to the 30th of the 6th, 75, 18,433 units the government sold to people. This is how my mother bought a house. See these things where it says sold? These are fixed interest rates for 30-year loans. Which is the other way you fix housing. You force the banks to offer 30-year fixed loans to people buying homes, not investment properties, for family homes. Units sold for the first time, tenants for... So new family, new units sold for the first... Oh, okay. So they sold 335 units. Vacated units, 207. Country movable units. The Housing Act 1958 was amended on the 17th of December 1974 to enable the Housing Commission to hire movable units, granny flats, to homeowners who wish to have their elderly parents living close to them. Aboriginal housing. I don't know why that's all different, but anyway, we've obviously kept this. They have industrial land. The other thing that's spinning, this is the full cost as well. Like, this is what should happen every year. Housing Commission should be forced to do this again. This is the 36th one. It's amazing, right? So my point in that is, and that's everything to do with housing. Like, you can go line by line by line, line by line, and there's nothing in this. It's the 37th annual report of the Housing Commission of Victoria for the period of the 1st of July 1974 to the 30th of June 1975, presented both to the House of Parliament pursuant to the Housing Act. So the Housing Act demanded that the Housing Commission do this every year, and now they don't. Why is that blacked out there? But yes, I'll list this site because it's very interesting. If you go to this Victorian Government Library Services website, what you'll find in there is the solution to the housing problem. We don't need to think outside the box. We don't need to think of new ideas. The ideas are already there. The evidence is there. I've just shown you a time in our history when our government was selling thousands of homes a year just in the state of Victoria. Now, you've got to think all this money came from the federal government, And they were doing that in Queensland, in Victoria, in South Australia. That's how Elizabeth got built, by the way. Elizabeth wouldn't exist if it wasn't for this federal government program. The other thing about this federal government program, if it was started by the Menzies government, continued by the Whitlam government, and continued after that by the Malcolm Fraser government. It was only in the 80s that everything changed. Now, what else changed in the 1980s? Oh, that's when we went to a free trade world. Right? That's when we went to this neoliberal world where the people of Australia could no longer get reports from Housing Commissioner like this so that we could understand what the government's actually doing to fix the housing issues in this country. I'll leave everybody now. I want to make another video within the next 24 hours on Headspace, how much money both governments give Headspace and how it's just good money after bad, and that money would be better spent in the public health system, going directly to the state public mental health system rather than going to Headspace, which from what I can work out is costing the government twice as much money as it costs if they gave the money to the public health system. So that should be an interesting video. Like I said, this election's just an election for what faction of the Australian Uni Party runs the place, but both parties are the same. If you live in a capital city, the best thing you can do is vote Greens. I live in Kennedy, so we're getting Bob Katter, and as long as there's minority government, we get good things with Bob Katter. Bob Katter got us a brand new hospital in Atherton back in the days when Scott Morrison needed his vote. So if you live in country Australia, maybe an independent's the best for you. I don't know. As far as Labor and Liberal are concerned, they're both the same party. They have the same basic ideals. They have the same neoliberal concepts. And without independents and Greens to force them to do good things, neither party's going to do anything that's good for the country. That's all I have to say for today. Stay healthy, stay safe, have a good day, and remember, if you're entitled to redress, chances are you'll win a federal lawsuit, not a federal lawsuit, a civil lawsuit. So go and see a lawyer and get real advice on that. And by the way, all these reports here that are listed like this, that's because people like me fought for years and years and years to get our state ward files from the from the Victorian government, and part of the inquiries that they had about all that was that past information from the government should be easily accessible to the people of Victoria. And that's why I can go all the way back to 1939, 1940 to look at the Victorian Housing Commission, how it was won, how it worked, and why it worked. This was one of the best housing programs on the entire planet, by the way. It's the gold standard, and it's what we should be doing. Thank you. Goodbye, everybody. Have a safe and good day.